Father Alex McCullough. I'm the pastor here, and I'm just going to introduce our speaker this evening. This is Chris Vander, who has been going on a tour of sorts to share the story of his father, and it's a pretty remarkable story. We actually have a personal connection. So Chris took over as the athletic director at Christendom. I think it was like 2007 or 8. When did you start?
7.
07. I'll tell you guys, this is like the least important thing that we hear tonight, but it is my personal connection of sorts. About 2 weeks before I graduated, I went to Chris's office, and they had these sweet Property of Christendom athletic department T-shirts, and I was like, I am desperately gathering mementos to remember these 4 wonderful years of my life, and I had my $10, which in college kid money is like $1,000. I was like, I would like to buy one of these T-shirts. And he said, you know what? You've earned it. You can have that shirt for free. And it is, to this day, one of my prized possessions. That shirt is older than some of the people in this room. I still have it. It does not have armpits anymore. And I'll share this with you guys. I was actually wearing it under my shirt and under my cassock when I was ordained a priest because I'm a very superstitious man. So we're very appreciative of Chris being here tonight to give this talk. I'll turn things over to him in a moment, but I figured maybe we'd start with a prayer, unless you have a prayer. We're good? All right. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the gift of this evening, this opportunity to gather together. We ask that you continue to pour out your graces, blessings upon our family parishes, and upon all families throughout the church and throughout the world. We ask you might give them all the graces and strength that they need in order to live out their vocations with great integrity, that they might love sacrificially, that they might pour themselves out for one another. We ask that you prosper the work of Chris and his mission and all those who join with him in spreading the story of sacrificial love, the story of giving oneself entirely to one's vocation and for the birth of holiness and everything. We pray that you bless his words, that you bless this talk and our time together, that you might work all of it for the sake of our holiness, for the sake of our growing closer to your Son and transformative union with him. We place all these intercessions under the mantle of protection of the Blessed Mother as we pray. Hail
Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
All righty. I would recommend both. Yeah. I'm going to test your mic level. Okay. Back with Ed. Thanks.
Thank you, Father, for the introduction. It's good to be here. It's a great joy to share this story. This past April, I believe it was April 9th, a little boy, baby boy, was born, and the dad baptized him immediately. And the reason why is because they were told that he would die within minutes, maybe seconds of being born. That's because 4 months prior, on December 28th, they received the news that he would be born with trisomy 18. If you're not familiar with trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. As the numbers go down, the handicap and the problems go up. Actually, in the weeks following, the diagnosis would change to trisomy 13, which is a death sentence. 90% die within the first year, most die in utero. The rest die shortly after birth. The body just doesn't develop, is not prepared for life in its new climate. With trisomy, there's problems with the eyes. Oftentimes they're born without one or sometimes both eyes. Sometimes they're born with just one eye. The heart doesn't develop, the internal organs don't develop. They received the news on December 28th, which was a Saturday. The next day, Sunday, they went to a mass at the chapel where they go to mass. The mass was celebrated by Father Tom. He preached on Thomas of Becket, St. Thomas the Apostle, and the chapel was within a mile of a man named Tom, who they knew passed away. They thought we can't ignore God's urgings, so they decided they were going to name their little one Thomas. and they were going to pray to this man, Tom, for him. So they came up with prayer cards. Their kids blanketed the school, the community, family, basically started a 4-month novena. Initially, their prayer was that he would live long enough to be baptized. And then midway through the pregnancy, at the urgings of a few who encouraged the mother to pray big because God likes to grant big requests. God likes to be generous. So she changed her prayer to a full cure for her son. So he was born April 9th. When he was born, he was missing his right eyeball. In the medical world, there's either normal or not normal, and he was described as normal. His heart was fine, his major organs were fine, his digestive system was fine. They had to close up his umbilical cord, which is kind of minor in today's world, I'm told. But otherwise, other than missing a right eyeball, he seemed like a normal baby boy. He continued to live. Day after day, he ate on his own, breathed on his own. Then they started talking about discharging him, which weeks ago was just a dream for the parents. Before they did the discharge, they did a genetic swab test. The results showed no trisomy. The parents starting to smile, thinking, I think I know what's going on here. Medical staff, a little confused, said, well, we need to do a blood test. So they do a genetic blood test. The genetic blood test comes back no trisomy. So this little guy who was diagnosed 4 months prior with trisomy, who the geneticist during the pregnancy said in her opinion, 100% chance their little one would have trisomy, did not have trisomy. And I tell you this story because the man, Tom, they were praying to is my dad, Tom Vander. And it's his story I want to share with you tonight. Dad and Mom are both from South Dakota. Dad grew up on a big farm. Mom's a city girl, and that way it's your typical Hollywood story. It's kind of where the Hollywood story ends. Dad played basketball and football in high school. They got married after college. Dad graduated from Creighton University, got his degree in math. He would go on to get his master's in actuary science. I still don't understand people that have those degrees, but that was Dad's mind. After graduating from Creighton, he joined the U.S. Navy. He always wanted to fly. My mom said it's because the big farm where he was at and his chore was weeding the garden was directly underneath the pathway to the local airport. So you can picture him being a little boy out there seeing all these planes thinking, I'm going to do that someday. So he flew for the Navy. He served one tour in Vietnam, flying A-7s off the USS America. And growing up, he would share with us and the extended family the thrill of taking off and landing, especially on an aircraft carrier in the dead of night in the big black ocean with nothing to lead you home but a set of red lights. In 1973, my parents were in California. And right around that time, my parents, they never fell away from their faith. They were always faithful, praying daily, went to Mass on Sundays. But they became exposed to Father Patrick Peyton and Father Robert Fox. Father Patrick Peyton famously said, the family that prays together stays together. And Father Robert Fox is a big proponent of the family rosary. So in 1973, my family started saying the family rosary, and I'll talk more about that later. In 1980, my parents were in Georgia. That's where I was born. I was the fifth. And to all extensive purposes, I think most of the family thought Georgia was where we're going to stay. And then late 70s, I think it's an understatement to say there was confusion in many areas, especially also confusion in the church and in the schools. It was creeping in, and my parents decided they weren't happy with the education that their oldest was getting, and they wanted all their sons to get an authentic Catholic education, and they wanted them all to go to the same school. So they uprooted and moved to Virginia in 1981 to a small, very small Catholic school that had just started that didn't even have a full-size gym. That was my dad's big criticism of it. But they believed in the mission of the founder, who had a mission of a Orthodox Catholic school focused on teaching the faith. In 1983, my family bought a small 27-acre farm. That's where we grew up. As I said, I'm one of 7. The oldest is a priest of the Diocese of Arlington, and the youngest is Joseph. And those 2 are the favorites in the family. And the reason I say that is, first, when your son or your brother can give you the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, can absolve your sins, and can give you the apostolic pardon before death that sends you on the express lanes to upstairs, they move to the top of the list, no questions asked. Joseph is the favorite also because he has Down syndrome, and he's the youngest, but more so because he has Down syndrome. He was born in 1987. My parents did not know that he would have Down syndrome. They had an inkling because Mom was 43, but they did not know for sure until he was born. Mom decided to do a home birth at that time with a midwife, and when my dad called the midwife to say, "I think you should get here," the midwife's response was, "Prepare yourself, I probably won't be there." So my dad delivered Joseph into this world in a very providential overshadowing of what he would do later in life also. But overnight, our family was radically changed for the better with Joseph entering our family. Those that have been around children or adults with special needs understand that they make you love better. They make you give of yourselves. It's John Paul the Great who would say we find ourselves when we give of ourselves. And that's what we found with Joseph, and it was led first and foremost through my parents, because right from the minute he was born, they did everything they could to do whatever he needed. One of the images burned in the minds of us brothers, there's 2 of our dad. One specifically is regarding Joseph, is when Joseph was 2, they took him to a specialist who said he needs to creep and crawl. He needs to crawl to develop his brain. So, okay, the family's going to creep and crawl with Joseph so that he develops. So Dad and Mom would crawl around the house. Dad would crawl around outside in the yard. Dad got the rollerblade elbow pads and knee pads because he was getting calluses. He would put those on. And my dad would crawl around the house with his 2-year-old special needs son because that's what his son needed. And he was going to do whatever his sons needed, which stands in very stark contrast and opposition, unfortunately, to the world we live in, where we have countries now bragging that they are eliminating Down syndrome people from their population. And it's a tremendous shame. The reason why I talk so much about Joseph is because in 2008, my dad died saving Joseph. My dad, after he got out of the military, he became an airline pilot and flew for almost 30 years, I believe, for different carriers. And after he retired, he worked at Christendom College as athletic director in crew development. And the young people he loved young people. But especially in the last 5 or 6 years of his life, Joseph was always with him. Dad coached most of us in sports growing up. He coached at Christendom, and Joseph was always a member of the team. He quickly became the VIP wherever he went, whether or not that was with the college students or whether or not that is at the parish. I joke with people that say, "Oh, I know your brother," and I say, "Which one? Is it Father Tom or is it Joseph?" Because after Mass, when Joseph serves, there's 2 receiving lines. There's one for the main celebrant, and then there's one for Joseph. Because, again, those with Down syndrome, they're joyful, they trust, they're always smiling, they assume the best about people, and they'll hug anyone within 6 inches of them. And I think there's a good challenge for us, is maybe we can learn something from some of their habits. So in 2007, my dad retired. He convinced me to take his job at Christendom, and for the last year, he was officially retired, living on the farm. And so my dad's habit was he would run 7 or 8 miles 3 times a week. He started that when he was 22 in the military because they told him, look, your blood pressure is on right here, and if it goes up, you're not going to be able to fly anymore. And he wasn't going to do anything that would risk flying, so he started running, and he ran for the rest of his life 3 times a week. So the morning of September 8th, 2008, the feast of our birth of our Blessed Mother, Dad, Mom, and Joseph went to morning mass like they usually did, and they came home to the farm. And you know, if you're a property owner, but especially if you're a small farm owner, there's always something to do. So that day, the chore was to get the above-ground pool ready for the winter. So Dad and Joseph go outside. Mom's in the house. Right about 15 feet away from the swimming pool is the family septic tank. One of the tops is covered with a piece of metal about 6.5, 7 feet deep, approximately full of about 4.5 feet of sewage. Never been a problem before. We've lived in that property for years. Nobody ever stepped on it. Joseph accidentally stepped on it, and before he knew where he stepped, it was too late, and he plunged down into the sewage. My dad either heard or saw that he told a gentleman who was working on our property on the house to go tell my mom to call 911. We didn't call 911 growing up. 911 was only called for life and death, so we know that Dad knew that something serious was going on. So he told the man to call 911, and then he jumped in because his son needed his help. And because that's how he lived his life. He lived his life, if somebody needed help, he was going to be the one to help them, whether or not it was his son, his wife, his grandkids, or his friends. Joseph's about 5'2", 180 pounds at the time. There's no way my dad was going to be able to lift him out. So the best he could do is try to get his head close to the surface to breathe fresh air. Because obviously, if you don't know, the fumes in a septic tank take people's lives within seconds, maybe minutes. So the man working on the house came back to help after he told my mom, and he's pulling from above, and my dad's underneath, and my dad's last words on this earth were, "You pull and I'll push." And at that point, the fumes overtook him. He sunk below, and he would eventually drown. Mom arrived shortly after, and she brought a strap, and they put it underneath Joseph's arms, and they pulled him, but they couldn't pull him all the way out. He was too heavy. So all they could do was to hold his head right about the opening so that he could breathe fresh air. So you can imagine the pain, the horror of my mom, not able to do anything, knowing that the love of her life for over 40 years is down there, giving his life for their youngest son, a son that our troubled world said should not be given the breath of life. About 12 minutes later, the ambulance arrived, 10 to 12 minutes. They immediately pulled Joseph out and started working on him because he had plunged under, he had ingested. He was coughing and throwing up. They had to be told that there was somebody else down there. And when they pulled him out, my mom, who was there watching, said that she knew that there was no life in my dad. Some in our world would say, what a waste. How could a 66-year-old man in the peak physical condition with many grandkids, a wife that he loves, 1 year into retirement, throw his life away to save his son with special needs? There are many that would say that in our troubled world. But we who have faith don't say that. Rather we believe in Christ's words that there is no greater love than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. The first miracle of that day, in my opinion, is that when Joseph didn't sink back down, he stayed the entire time, even when just one man was holding on to him from the top, and my dad had submerged. Second miracle is when they took him to the hospital, the medical staff said he will develop sepsis. It's not a question of if. He will get it, and there's still a chance he will pass away. Because if the infection is bad enough, and he could die. 5 days later, he left the hospital without any sepsis ever and a touch of pneumonia. To give you a comparison, the paramedic that worked on Joseph got E. coli, and he was sick and out of work for 2 weeks. And my brother spends 5 days in the hospital after being submerged. My dad's viewing lasted for over 5 hours. Many of the people that came through had never actually met my dad. They said, I saw how he was as a husband. I saw what he did with his kids. I saw how he acted with his grandkids. I saw how he helped father. And I know how he died, and that was enough for me to come and pay my respects to the family. One man in particular was a pilot that flew with him commercially, not a Catholic. He stood in line for 3 hours just to get to the casket and to say sorry to my mom. And he said all he could do, again, a man not of faith, all he could do was look around and say, this must be how you're supposed to live your life. That's the only thing he could think of. As I mentioned, my dad died on September 8th, the birth of our Blessed Mother. His funeral was on September 15th, the Feast of Our Lady of Sorrows. My parents had a huge devotion to the Rosary, which I'll talk about. But again, God's overarching design in all of this. At the funeral, which was attended by close to 2,000 people, the church was full 45 minutes before the funeral began. There were 70 priests, 1 bishop, and over 80 altar boys. And that's because my dad was in charge of the altar boys at the parish. When the parish was started, the priest asked my dad, will you be in charge of the altar boys? And my dad's approach was the more the merrier. I'll train the older ones to train the younger ones, and it is not uncommon in those time frames to see anywhere from 20 to 35 boys serve a Sunday Mass. It kind of looks like Holy Thursday every Sunday. So 80 of these young men show up to serve the Mass to the man that taught them how to light a candle, how to genuflect properly, how to say Father, things like that. Just before the funeral Mass started, there was a seminarian there. And in Arlington, the seminarians go down to Mexico for intensive language training for 1 semester. And he had been down there, and he had developed some type of parasite. I don't know how. Came back, and doctors just couldn't get a handle on it. They couldn't tell what it was, how to fix it, and it was just wreaking havoc with his system. He wasn't the same. He couldn't function very well, to the point where he was literally thinking, I'm going to have to drop out of seminary. I thought this was my vocation, but I can't continue to do this. And one of his priest friends, who's also close with the family, said, before they processed up, said, go say a prayer to Miss Vanderwoody. It's like, no, there's all these people here. The casket's right there. And he's like, just go. You don't have to say it out loud. Just go say a private prayer. So the seminarian walks up and says a private prayer. Funeral Mass is on a Monday. I believe it's Wednesday, but maybe Thursday. He would do his blood work like every 2 days. The doctor would monitor it. And Wednesday or Thursday, the doctor calls him and said, I don't know what you did, but it worked. And he said, what do you mean? He's like, well, whatever that was that you had, it's gone. It's not, I'm doing your blood test. I can tell you it's not the same. The reaction to my father's last act on this earth generally is one of, how did he have that strength? And man, I hope I can do that if I'm called to do that. And so for those questions, I would like to kind of share a little bit of what made him that way, a little bit more about his life. Quite honestly, what made Dad different, heroic, and may I dare say someone worth imitating, is that throughout his life, he did his daily duty in his vocation as called by God, which was often ordinary, simple, and hidden. This formed a man of virtue, of character, able to cooperate with God's grace day in and day out. And that prepared him for giving his life at the end. And thinking about my dad's life, 3 specific words come to mind. The first one is simple. And I start with a simple faith. I think growing up on a farm, I use the analogy, if you're a farmer and the vet is telling you all the medical problems and diagnosing, using the big words about your dairy cow, all the farmer is going to say, look, I just need to know if my dairy cow is going to die or not. I don't need to know all this. And I do believe my dad growing up on a farm, the faith was a simple thing to him. God is who he says he is. Christ is who he says he is. Therefore, I'm going to trust and humbly obey and submit to God, Christ, and the church. And that's easy to say and very difficult to live, especially in the generation where we're living. I understand that. But I do believe that freed my dad to live a very free life, knowing that that was the fundamental part of his faith. Big part of that is humility. Part of my job also in working for this is interviewing all the people. It's not a job, it's a joy to interview the people that knew my dad, and they're all talking about his humility. There's 4 pilots that flew with him in Vietnam still alive. I got them on the phone, and then I've talked with airline pilots, and everyone to the one said, your dad was a phenomenal pilot, but no one would ever know, and he would definitely never tell anybody. If you were flying with him, he made you feel comfortable, and if you wanted to fly that leg of the trip, he was hands off. He'd let you do it. There was no arrogance, ego, or pride in him, and that is what most people have said. Dad was very good at many things. He was a good mechanic. He was a good carpenter. Obviously, he was good at math. His sons were not. That's why tensions in Algebra 2. But he would never lord it over anyone, and he was always asking for people to help him do stuff. And this goes back to the altar boys, too. Dad was a big believer in, why would I just do something for myself if I can include others and do it with more than just myself? And as a result, us as sons got to experience that. There are many tasks that my dad could have done by himself, but he included his sons, he included his grandkids. And I'm sure he enjoyed the presence. He really did. But it's also what we got to engage and see him do as a father and as a grandfather. Specifically in Dad's vocation, my dad did not have a lot of quotes. He was actually described as kind of a St. Joseph figure, very quiet behind the scenes, loved to just kind of sit back and enjoy, but help and serve in any way he could. But specifically in his vocation, that's one thing I do remember is when people would come to him in college, they say, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he always said the same thing. He'd say it to us too, just do your daily duty, do your vocation to the best of your ability. That's God's plan for you right now. And Dad, as a husband and a father, that really played out specifically in 2 ways, as a leader and as a guardian. Dad's leader specifically started with as a spiritual head of the family, and that was to keep the priorities in line for the family. And those priorities really spiritually came down to Christ and the Blessed Sacrament and adoration and Mass and the praying of the daily rosary. I said in 1973, our family started saying the rosary. We said the family rosary every night, period. And I'm one of 7 boys, and we tried very hard to escape the rosary. And I hate to say that in church, but it's the truth. We played a lot of sports growing up. Dad coached us. And generally, we had the option of we say the rosary before sports or we said the rosary after sports, but the rosary would be said. There are many times we'd come back from a late game on a Friday night or something, it's 9:45, 10:15, we're exhausted, we're thinking, okay, tonight's the night we're gonna escape. We walk in the house and we put our stuff down and we hear Dad say, all right, family room. However, we would go into the family room and Dad would drop to his knees. For 15 minutes every day, my brothers and I, and the grandchildren that said it with us would see my dad on his knees for 15 minutes before God. We didn't see him for 2 hours. We didn't see him levitating, but we saw him on his knees for 15 minutes. And that is one of the other images, along with crawling with his 2-year-old Down syndrome, that is burned into the image of the sons and the grandchildren, is seeing him on his knees, just saying the rosary. And my dad put in kind of some crazy days. He would get up at 4 a.m. to drive to D.C. because his flight started at 6. He would fly back and forth to New York 3 times, get home at about 3:30. During the summer, he'd change his clothes and come out to the hayfield because we were baling hay to raise money to pay for college. Bale the hay, bring it back, put it in the barn before it rains, have dinner, 9 o'clock, rosary. To the point where my dad would cramp up a lot while kneeling, and so he had a bottle of apple cider vinegar right next to him because he believed it cured his cramps. But my point is that it was something small. It was 15 minutes on his knees, and that has burned itself into the memory of me and my brothers, of seeing your father humble himself before God and lead the family in something so small. The Blessed Sacrament, Christ in the Eucharist. Shortly after we moved up to Virginia, my parents heard about this priest that was doing Wednesday night holy hours, and he would do the rosary, exposition, benediction, give a homily, and say some prayers. And my parents said, there wasn't a lot of that was not happening in the early 80s, especially at least near DC, and so it was kind of novel. And so my parents said, yeah, that's what we want our sons to be exposed to. We want our sons to want to spend time with Christ, and what better way to do that is to lead and demonstrate this. So basically from 1985 until 2000, my family would do this holy hour, which happened just to be an hour away. So we would drive 1 hour for a 1-hour holy hour and drive 1 hour back on a Wednesday night, because my parents believed that is what our spiritual life needed, to worship Christ, to spend time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and to hear the truth proclaimed. Guardian, the first, I mentioned priorities, but the other way Dad especially guarded his family was regarding Mom. As a commercial airline pilot, there's kind of a lifestyle of you go out after you fly with the crew and you get drinks and hang out, and Dad never did that. Dad would go on his run, he'd go make a visit, or he'd go to Mass. And I do believe it's because my dad valued his relationship with my mom, the second most important relationship for him besides his relationship with God, and he would not do anything that would even remotely put that in jeopardy or lead down a path. The second way he kind of guarded Mom is how we, the sons, talked with Mom. The worst thing we could hear was, "What did you just say to your mother?" Which was usually followed by, "Go to your room," which was usually followed by, "And wait for me." And I do believe not only is it just because of respect for your parents, but I do believe there was a sense of Dad knew, as sons, how we're going to talk and interact with our mom probably would be how we're going to interact with other women, and probably how we're going to interact with our wife if we got married. And he was teaching us and setting a tone very early. The other area is the importance of Sundays. So as I said, we played sports growing up. By the time I got to about 8th grade, Mom and Dad would not allow competitive organized sports on Sunday. We couldn't participate in it. And many of my brothers too. And some of my brothers are very good athletes. We had plenty of opportunities to do club, AAU, or select, as it was called. And I do believe the reason is this, is again, the simple faith of, look, this is a commandment. It's a day for the Lord. It's a day for the family. And I'm in education. I've been an athletic director. I work in an hour outside DC, which is like turned into sports mecca of the world. And sports does not bring a family together on Sundays. I've seen it. You have one parent taking one child one direction, and you have another parent going somewhere else for a tournament. And oftentimes they don't even go to Mass together. And I think for my parents, it's just the risk wasn't worth the reward. And so it was just a complete non-negotiable that this will not happen. Sundays was also very distinct in what I saw my dad do, which was almost nothing. The only day of the week. He would take a nap. He would read a newspaper. He would watch football and throw the football. It was very different from every other day. The second word is integrity, and what I mean by that more is authentic. As I said, Dad was described as Saint Joseph, but the other characteristic was he's a very gentle, authentic, joyful man. You know, St. Francis de Sales has a great quote. He says, "Nothing is so strong as gentleness, and nothing is so gentle as real strength." And that really defines my dad. He was not a pushover. You can ask the sons, the grandchildren, or some of the college students. But he was gentle. He was approachable. He was authentic. He smiled. And at the same time, he was just. But there wasn't a judgment there. And I do believe that was a very important, and even teenagers could sense that, and that's why they were drawn to him. They knew he was going to listen. He wasn't going to judge them, even though they might get some justice in his words. Towards the end of my dad's life, he did little things that we kind of just found out. You know, basically the last 5 years of his life, he just gave up eating sweets for the unborn. Throughout his life, he would fast frequently. Again, nobody knew, probably except for my mom, and a few people were just like, oh, I haven't seen Dad eat in 4 days. It's not like he was telling the world, but little things that I believe helped him in a virtuous life. And that virtuous life played out in an extraordinary way at the end. The other quote that I heard that Dad said, other than do your daily duty, the other one was, just do the right thing. Usually it's pretty obvious. We're usually the ones that overcomplicate things. And obviously that plays out in the end of his life, but it also played out throughout his life. He just tried to do the right thing and not really evaluate the circumstances, just do what he felt like he was called to do. And the last word is committed. Dad believed in being committed to the important things, and that's his faith through the church, through the schools that his children participated, and then through just generally serving and being charitable to others. I describe him as just being a very engaged, present father, whether or not that was his sports, whether or not that was, hey, I'm working on the car, just come hand me wrenches, not total bonding time per se, just doing things together. And then his charity, his humility and his charity are what a lot of people have talked about. After the funeral, one of the neighbors who didn't even really know Dad very well just said, he was the type of man that would give you the shirt off his back if you asked. And many people at the viewing and the funeral said, Chris, you know why all these people are here? I'm like, well, I think so, but I'm not sure. Tell me. Because they know if they were in the septic tank, he would have done the exact same thing. That's just the type of man he was. If you needed help, you called Tom Vander, or you knew Tom Vander would help you. As I said, when the parish was started, the priest went to my mom and dad and asked them to build a portable altar, build a bookcase that kept all the books for the hymnals, store it at their farm, bring it over Sunday morning, set it up for Mass, take it down Sunday afternoon, take it back to the farm, and do that every week. My parents said, sure. So they did that for 6 years. And when I asked the priest, I said, Father, why do you ask my parents? And he said, well, first of all, they had a barn and they lived a half mile from, so that was a plus. But secondly, because I knew your parents cared about a reverent, sacred Mass and space, and they would do their best to make that auditorium or to make that gym as reverent as possible so that everybody would come in there, would feel like they're actually going to Mass and not in the middle of an auditorium. The best story, I think, of Dad's kind of service and charity was he convinced a family to move up from Texas to go to the high school where we were at and to kind of join the community. That's how much he believed in the community. And so maybe a week before school started, a big yellow school bus pulled up in our driveway. And out of the bus came 10 children, 2 adults, and a golden retriever. And they stayed with us in our 4-bedroom, 1.5 bath farmhouse built in 1908 for a month. And then Dad went and co-signed the mortgage for the family because they had just moved up here and the dad didn't have much credit at the time. And many people don't know, But the family now, they're grown, and they all come and talk about, oh, I remember spending the time. I only thought it was 2 days, and then they told me about a month ago. They're like, no, it was a month. So that changes things. So I hope these things give a little bit of a glimpse into what my dad was like as a man. Dad gave his life each and every day, first to God, then to his wife and family, and then to those around him. So when the time came to give his life for his son, it was the right thing to do, and he was called to do it. He strove to do the right thing every time. Yes, he failed many times, but we're told from many that a saint is just a sinner that never gives up. And that's what my dad was. He sinned, but he got up every time, and every day he sought to do God's will in his life as a husband and as a father. And by doing the ordinary things day in and day out, it prepared him to do something extraordinary. My dad never aimed to do anything extraordinary. And in many ways, that's very contradictory to our world right now, especially for the young people. I work in education. The young people are just trying to capture that one moment that will go viral, and then they will have it made. And so in many ways, they're just aiming for one extraordinary thing. And I think Dad's life teaches us quite the opposite. And I believe that's what we're taught as Catholics too, is virtue takes time and habits and doing the little things. So I believe the power and the inspiration of Dad's story is that in many ways he was a normal and a simple man that we can relate to. And he did what God asked him to do each day, especially when it came to serving others, sacrificing for his family. We all hope and pray that if we're called, we can give our life in a heroic offer of life, but that might not be our call. But we can imitate many of the things that my dad did, like saying the daily rosary, being committed and faithful to Christ, his church, the rosary, and the real presence, being faithful and present to our spouses and children, volunteering and helping others. Many people have commented that Dad died as he lived his life. Finally, in God's providential plan, Joseph has been healthy ever since. My mom is now 81, and she has a bad hip, so she moves very slowly. She will not leave the farmhouse. And now Joseph takes care of her. He brings the groceries in. He walks her in, carries her purse, does those things to the point now when I live 10 minutes away. When I go over and I might move something in the house, he kind of glares at me now like, no, this is my house now. And the providential plan of God, we don't always understand God's plan, but God's plan is perfect. And now to look back and to see the son that my dad saved now taking care of my mom with my dad not being there, you kind of have to look up and say, God knows what he's doing. So why now? Why am I here talking about my dad who died 17 years ago? And the reason why is 4 years ago, a group of men, the main one never met my dad. He was a convert, and he found my dad's story, and he knows a priest pretty well who knew the family, and he said, wait, why isn't this guy canonized? Like, it looks like it's all there. And the priest said, no, because nobody's doing the work. And then, he did what priests do. They just, awkward silence. They keep looking at you until you volunteer to do the work, right? Sorry, Father. Sorry. Come on. So he started the Tom Vander Woude Guild, and he started interviewing people and talking to the diocese and saying, hey, we think we got something here. What do you think? So I joined about a year ago. And in the last 9 months, the Arlington Diocese, where we live, where my dad passed away, has taken some pretty big steps as they consider whether or not they should open his cause. His cause is not open yet, and that's actually one of the things we've learned in the process is that the best way to get somebody's cause not to open is to say it's already open. You don't get ahead of but they have taken 3 very important steps. They've signed a contract with a Roman postulator. So this is a person that lives in Rome, and all they do is investigate and oversee the process for saints. They know Rome inside and out. So they signed a contract with that. They asked the guild if the diocese could be the petitioner, which is the organization that petitions Rome to open somebody's cause, should it open. And then they announced a vice postulator, which are all the preliminary steps that must be done before somebody opens a cause. So those are all very exciting. The process for canonization, just to give it, I'll be brief because it's very involved, but the Catholic Church takes the process very seriously, and that's for a reason why many take many years and are expensive. I think we're used to JP2, Mother Teresa, Carlo, and Pier Giorgio, who got the fast track. A lot of saints don't get that. A lot of saints, it starts at the ground level because those are the people that knew the person, so they can vouch for whether or not they were holy. They can vouch for any potential miracles. They bring it to the diocese, and then the bishop in the diocese starts to investigate. If the diocese and the bishop agree that they think they have something there, they open the cause. They do a very detailed investigation where they interview multiple witnesses, and every witness has to be interviewed by a notary, an attorney, somebody arguing for the cause, and somebody actually arguing against the cause. After all that testimony is done and recorded, they evaluate it, and if they still feel good about it, they send it to Rome. And then it's on Roman time. And that can take anywhere from 1 year. There are some cases that they're still venerable and they're still ongoing. That is besides miracles. So the whole investigating the person's life, there's also another track of where they're investigating alleged miracles. Technically, we have to call them prayer favors until somebody's cause is open, but alleged miracles. And those are scrutinized and evaluated usually by professionals in that area. And now 90% of those miracles generally have to be medically related because it's the easiest way to verify. Somebody had something right here, here's a test that shows it. A week later, they don't. The doctors say there's nothing that could have caused this other than divine intervention. So the process is, unfortunately, can take time and it's expensive. What's helped my dad's potential cause is that in 2017, Pope Francis added that the offer of one's life is a new path to sainthood in addition to heroic virtue or martyrdom. For the whole life of the church, there's two ways to get canonized. They demonstrate heroic virtue, Mother Teresa, John Paul the Great, examples, or you get martyred. Those are only two. Ironically, Maximilian Kolbe was kind of what Pope Francis was thinking when he named this, because JP2, as the Pope, they have complete control. He just trumped it and said, he's a saint, I'm going to canonize him. We're going to call him a martyr for life. But he would have fit the offer of life perfectly. So with that, with those positive steps that the diocese has taken, I have started to work for the Guild to interview people that knew Dad and to go around and share his story and to ask for your support in different ways. One, to spread his story if you feel so inclined. I do believe that in the world we live in, we need good news stories. We're bombarded with the bad. We need to know that there's normal, simple people out there that lived a virtuous life and even died in an extraordinary way that I believe can motivate us that it's possible for all of us. And we don't have to aim for the extraordinary. We can do it in the little ways of virtue day in and day out. So spreading the story, praying, and then if you feel called to support financially through donating to the Guild. So with that, I want to close with a second baby story that's connected with the first. So the first one was baby Thomas. The Sunday after he was born, the godparents showed up to meet him for the first time. While they're in the elevator, the godmother started up a conversation with a new birth mother who looked very depressed. And the reason why is the new birth mother, the second one, said that her baby was born 3 weeks early and was born 18 minutes, did not have oxygen for 18 minutes. They actually had to revive him, significant brain damage, and things were not looking good. He would have subconscious seizures. They had to have him heavily medicated, and whenever they took him off the medication, seizures would spike, and they had to put him back on medication. It's just a vicious loop. So the godmother, being a kind of in-your-face, blunt, positive faith figure, said, well, here's a holy card, and we think something's happening down the hallway. Maybe you should try praying. Have you ever heard of Tom Vander? No, but we'll try anything. So on Sunday, they started praying. That Tuesday, 2 days later, the doctors come and say, we got to take him off the medication. He's going to have long-term damage if we keep him on this medication. Obviously, he probably will pass away. You should have his extended family come and say their goodbyes, probably within 4 days. So that Tuesday, the mom tells me she remembers sitting at her dining room table saying, Mr. Vander, if you can help my son, please do so. So Wednesday, they start taking him off the medication. And Dad was spending the night, and Friday morning, the baby opened an eye. And then he opened a second eye. And then he started breathing on his own. And then he started eating on his own. And he kept living off all the medication. And he also was discharged, and he is at home now also. And obviously, both sets of parents feel very strongly that God granted their prayers through the intercession of my dad. So with that, I hope my dad's story inspires, gives you some hope, and also allows you maybe to imitate some of the things that he did that allowed him to do what he did at the end of his life.